Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Hello, everyone, and we're back. And this is your host, Aaron Delp. And we have a really good conversation this week. We've been talking a lot about Gen AI and AI in general, and we talk about this intersection of AI and ML and how does it fit in with cloud computing. But we also, I feel like a lot of the use cases get lost sometimes. And I think also too, for especially in Gen AI, we've already gone into a bit of the trough of disillusionment at times. And so for that, we're going to actually be talking about one vertical in particular. We're going to be talking about legal and legal AI today. And so we have Jay, founder and CEO at Eve. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So first of all, welcome to the show. And before we jump into legal AI, if you will, let's talk a little bit about your background. Give everyone a brief introduction, please.
Absolutely. So I've been a builder for the longest time. I had the fortune to move to the Bay Area and escape the hedge fund, high-frequency trading world. It's my first job at Facebook, now called Meta, right before their IPO, and worked on a number of their teams, but spent the most amount of time on ads and groups, which got into the very interesting initial early signs of AI, where obviously Facebook at the time was doing early stages of machine learning for newsfeed, right? So a lot of the growth strategies was really around how do you get in front of people and get traction for the various Facebook products out there. From there, I joined Rubrik as a first engineer, and that was a wild ride. So I kind of grew to manage the product engineering team, and the company grew so much over the last 5.5 years I was there, and recently IPO'd. But that's really where I got exposed to building for the enterprise. So how do you build really, really robust solutions that needs to stand up to the strict security requirements and rigors of scale that happens with securing these large private environments like three-letter agencies or similar. And from there, had the opportunity to jump, change my careers again quite a bit, became a VC, largely investing in enterprise AI startups at Lightspeed Venture Partners. And then decided it's time to kind of start from scratch again and left to join and found Eve. And we can get into this a bit more, but we really saw the early signs of advancements in NLP really changing how software would end up getting personalized for the end user. And that was the thesis we started working on. And over the course of the years, we ended up really honing in deep on the legal industry, which I'm happy to get into details on.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into that a bit, because I admit the legal one is interesting to me, because when I really think about industries, right? Like, and I think about which ones are the most forward leaning and most likely to adopt new technologies, I don't think of legal. But at the same time, it maybe makes sense because, you look at a lot of the legal process is just so research heavy, so text heavy, so precedent heavy. So tell everyone a little bit about your thinking there and maybe like the most common use cases that this can help.
Yeah, so this is actually a really funny analogy that gets brought up all the time, right? So like historically, tech has been in one side and legal has been on another side. And this was a concern for us going into it as well. But when we started actually talking to lawyers, I hate to oversimplify here, but they just weren't shown anything good that actually changed how they do work, right? So if you still look at how a plaintiff attorney works, vast majority of them are honestly okay with just their cell phone, right? So you have email, you have the ability to talk to people, and the rest of the work is actually all human labor for the most part. It's how do you go read through and understand the case? How do you then write a demand letter or do discovery and start the litigation process? And understanding that was kind of the key to what led us to get so excited to build Eve for plaintiff attorneys. Is literally everything about the legal industry is changing now that technology is able to summarize, draft, do legal research and extract in seconds compared to 10, 20, 30 hours, it dramatically changes how the businesses are run, how people actually spend their time. How do you deliver higher value to clients? How do you service more clients than ever before that you otherwise priced out? And all of that is something we're actively seeing change for the users of Eve.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me a little bit about the behind the scenes of Eve. I mean, do you use foundational models and then maybe fine tune them? Do you have your own custom models? And like, what are your thoughts on that? And then like the current and future state for all of this, because it is moving so rapidly right now.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Aaron. It's really moving super rapidly to the point where even the people at the forefront of forget even us, right? So even the people building the models are catching up to research papers coming out and actively trying to move forward research on particular ways. And there's a bunch of variables that affects the stack across the board, right? So I'm sure viewers of this audience probably understands the RAG stack and similar things, but literally every single component of that stack is reliant on some assumptions you make around the quality of the models, the latency of the responses, and the context window that they can actually work on. Literally all of those matter. So for us, when we started, a really long time ago, so really, what was it? Probably early GPT-4 days, maybe Claude 1.5 days. As most you would expect, we started as a relatively simple wrapper on top. And that had to quickly change, right? So like the hard part here is in the legal world, you really can't hallucinate, and you really need to balance the use cases for when you need this creativity and brainstorming versus concrete grounded answers. And that puts all sorts of pressures on the stack. And as a result, like today, we do use all the foundational models, and we do explore, bespoke pipelines for very bespoke tasks. And it's a relatively sophisticated layer at this point, and we're constantly talking with each of the players and continuing to invest in our stack to take the best advantage of things that are about to come out even.
Yeah. And so you brought up in particular, because that's really fascinating to me, about a combination of two things. There's almost like the quality of the answers, the no hallucination side of it. Obviously, this is something that has to be very, very accurate all the time. But also too, when you have foundational models as the underlying wrappers, there have been use cases with all of them, but I'll call out GPT, as one that's been definitely known, like the beginning of GPT-4. And then if you ask the same question 6-8 months later, you may get a different answer, because the GPT-4 model is kind of a black box and evolving underneath the covers at times. And so how do you address that specifically of, A, getting the right answer, and B, getting a consistent answer that is accurate on top of it?
This is where a lot of our R&D and effort goes, right? So it's a three-step problem. So one is really understanding the core capabilities of the models and architecting our engineering stack to be able to benefit from advancements on the model. So what we've done consciously is we've bet on the model getting better over time, and not plateauing, at least rapidly. And we've already benefited massively from that architectural decision, right? So as you can imagine, it's not just that 4 rows coming out, but each of the model providers are actually improving it almost like every month now. And each of those improvements actually do come with changes, right? And I'm sure this is behind your question. The second thing is the product side. So the people using it can't adapt as quickly as technology changes. So this is where you have to really, really understand what workflows and how do lawyers actually use technology. And we've architected our product layers and user interfaces such that it is more agnostic. I mean, obviously you can't do everything, but it's more agnostic of the underlying model changing, right? And we've come up with multiple different ways of doing that we think are clever and unique, which happy to get into.
Sure.
But that has really allowed for user confidence to stay high and actually improve, because they're instead benefited from model improvements and not surprised by something they used to work on before drastically changing in a negative way, right? So like they don't care if it improves in a positive way, usually. They more care about like, is it starting to make up things, or quality is a bit lower, it didn't quite do that analysis as well as it did before. Those are the things that are sensitive to, and we've architected our product layers so users can verify and kind of see quickly and easily whether or not it's improved or not.
Sure. And that idea of validation and verification, is certainly top of mind. But then I'll add another one to that as well, and maybe we can kind of lump them all together and figure out how this is differentiated. Then there's the whole idea of secure data security and compliance as well, right? Like, yes, there's a bunch of data. It's a bunch of proprietary data. That data needs to be safe. It needs to be secure. You need to get, validated answers every time. So tell everyone a little bit about that process of, I'll use the term product quality as an overarching umbrella for everything, Jay. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, first step is hiring a good team. So a lot of us came from, Rubrik and other places that are basically in Facebook and Google that are used to building really secure solutions. So even, one answer, obviously, which I'll get into, is the compliance side of things. But even before that, you need to architect your solution appropriately such that it's aware of things like client attorney confidentiality, right? And that is something we've done at the foundational level. And the users have multiple ways of taking control of their data and, deleting, we call it cases, but deleting cases and deleting all subsequent related data associated with cases under the hood. And that's like one step of the equation. The second step is investing more effort and resources behind compliance earlier on than you would in a typical enterprise B2B lifecycle. And we've actually hit the ground running with SOC 2, Type 2, and HIPAA compliance as well. And we've just, as you know, this takes quite a bit of effort, and we've just decided to put that effort up front instead of passing it down the line and letting our consumers and customers take that risk on our behalf. We've done the basics of that. And lastly is the trust layer. So trust is multi-part, right? It's not just the data retention, data problems, but it's do I trust Eve to tell me the right things? Do I trust Eve to actually save me more time than I would spend in double checking the work? So that's the other side of it that actually has to work alongside all of this. Otherwise, even if you say like you have the most secure thing, yada, 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 it just doesn't matter, right? Like if the trust is not there, it doesn't matter. So we've kind of taken all of those three things and combined it to produce our solution.
Nice. And how also do you, like, we talked about RAG earlier and we talked about foundational models, but I'm taking a guess here that most legal organizations probably aren't, like when it comes to like, oh, is this RAG? Is this going to be a foundational model? It tends to get in the AI weeds pretty quickly, right? And so how do you obscure that away, and do you obscure that away? And is it like a custom RAG pipeline for each law firm, or how do you handle the uniqueness of each of your customers?
Absolutely. I mean, our lawyers don't know about anything called RAG happening under the hood. And the way to do it is you effectively boil down workflows and problems to what they're already used to in working with other attorneys and paralegals, right? So as long as the problems to them and how they do work doesn't look that different, nothing really changes. So we've aligned ourselves to have, a plaintiff attorney would do work, which is they would call their clients, intake information like transcripts and other documents about them. And that effectively starts off the pipeline for us, right? So once we have that data, then Eve makes the appropriate right decisions on which pipelines to use, which for X questions or X workflows, what is the most appropriate pipeline that would create the highest quality answer? And all of that does involve pretty different techniques in terms of retrieval and re-ranking and augmentation of data. It does change today quite substantially based on the user query and the user themselves, for that matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And it was interesting too. You mentioned earlier, like one of the big advantages is, like let's say research happens in minutes to hours instead of days to weeks, right? As a, just as a general estimate, right? How does that work from like a billing and financial side from a legal, because, the outside reputation of legal is, billable hours are king, right? And so now if you made it something quicker, well, now they're not as billable, right? And so like, how does ROI get calculated on something like this? And does it actually change the business model of legal organizations and law firms, or how does that translate? Is it dollars saved or more revenue? Tell everyone a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are two types of law firms out there, more broadly speaking, right? So there are those that service defendants, and there are those that service plaintiffs. And defendants, in practice, end up being law firms that service companies, right? And plaintiffs are oftentimes law firms that service individuals that are wronged in some way, shape, or form. And because this delineation and the fact that lawyer time is expensive, the industry has already made a split in the billing models, where plaintiffs oftentimes charge on contingency, so value created, and they take a percentage of the value, and the defendants charge by the hour because that's the closest thing they have to value. And meaning it's very hard for them to prescribe value, so the best they can do is say how much time they spent on it. And as a result, I anticipate, and we're already seeing, there to be differences in how people think about ROI on technology. On the plaintiff side, it's going to be more around how do I get through a larger volume of work and cases than before, because the more they get through, the more they're able to onboard, the more money they make, right? So they're able to settle more cases. And on the client side, the benefits are you're able to now increase the floor of quality of work delivered to you. And two, things typically happen faster and things happen cheaper. And now you can, make claims you otherwise could not, because it would have been too small for them to take you on. And that I expect, Eve is already helping significantly with that. And that's our core focus area. On the defendant side, which is what historically there's been most amount of legal tech for, because frankly, that's where the money was, right? And that's all hourly billing model. Here, we are seeing two types of changes happen for people that target that model, which is one is there's more augmentation done than cost reduction, meaning for each hour of work, they try to do an even more thorough quality of work than before, right? And the second thing that is happening is some early signs of value-related work, right? So for things that a company could view as a service, so I don't know, like, patent writing or one of these like common tasks that you're doing again and again, but are still so different and you still need a lawyer for, that can end up being a value-based thing, right? So like, how much value do you prescribe to X, and give me the value and I will get it done quickly because you also care about speed. So we're likely going to see a little bit of that play out. And it remains to be seen how that's actually going to, I think it's going to rely on power dynamics between companies, how much budget companies have to spend on legal services, and how the law firms themselves react as well on the defendant side.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I'll ask too, we'll kind of close this out on this while we're kind of talking about how this is changing the industry. Let's talk about the people aspect. So my day job is marketing, and I very much already see generative AI impacting marketing, especially on kind of the lower end stuff of like writing marketing copy or coming up with creative ideas or brainstorming or refining things. And, we keep seeing the scary headlines of like, oh, AI is going to take everyone's jobs. And so what is your thoughts and your real world on like supplementing things and almost being like, legal co-pilot versus replacement of staff? Well, what are you seeing out there when you're talking to law firms?
We certainly see vast majority of our clients do use it to increase case capacity, right? So at least on the plaintiff side, hiring people is hard enough, and the more productive you can make them, you can directly bring in more revenue. So that's the first place where it's going to happen. And over time, what I see happening is labor is going to get even more and more augmented by technology, right? Just like we've seen with other services in the past. Like there's been plenty of services like, bespoke data extraction and even like accounting, right? Like people manually doing accounting instead of using Excel or something. There's already been instances of this in history where it's happened. And I think we're now entering the second level, which is services can get even more specialized than ever before. And they're now products instead of services. And in that world, I anticipate a few different changes. I think one, on a business model perspective, functions that were historically relied on professional services, I think will look more like software services in the near future. And as a result, that means all sorts of things in terms of how they're staffed, where they spend money, and et cetera, right? So like you might have more roles opening up that look more like in sales and marketing or R&D than otherwise you would expect them to actually be doing the work instead of like an attorney or a paralegal. And I do think those roles are going to look meaningfully different than a normal marketing person or an attorney. There's probably a lot of similarities, but you still benefit from specializations. So I don't anticipate the labor needed to significantly decrease because you're going to get leverage, and that leverage can directly be related to revenue. But what I do expect to happen over the long run is the type of work being done will change. And I think that's inevitable, right? Because, you can just see, like if a software can summarize a 100-page document for you in 30 seconds, why would you ever bother to go read that for 8 hours and summarize it yourself? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So, the type of work will change, but I don't anticipate, from at least what I've seen so far, that there'll be like significant societal level staff reduction.
Sure. And it almost reminds me too, like, I'm going to severely date myself here, but I remember when job descriptions had like, requires Office, and Microsoft Office skills, or, those things aren't even listed because they're just considered so obvious now.
Table stakes.
And so what, I very much see going forward, especially as, the next generation generates colleges and gets out in the working world of, AI skills just become table stakes. It's just not even listed in the job description. So I can very much see that scenario you just talked about actively playing out in the very near future. Actually, Jay,
I think I will say this. I think like something that is unexpected in our industry is about half of the lawyers are already using something like ChatGPT or a similar tool every day, right? And all of our hires that we're making, all of them have obviously been using something along those lines every day. So I think I very much second exactly what you're saying, Aaron.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess that's really actually a great place for us to wrap. Jay, if anybody wants to learn more about Eve, follow you and what you have going on, where can they go?
Yeah, please follow me on LinkedIn and follow Eve on LinkedIn. That's the place where we try to make updates. We're getting better at being more active on other platforms. And of course, eve.legal is our homepage, and we're making updates all the time. We're actively hiring engineers and sales and marketing people. So if you know anyone in your network, please reach out to me, and we would love to talk to you.
Fantastic. Well, Jay, thank you very much for your time. And on behalf of Brian and myself, for everyone out there, thank you very much for listening or watching this week. And we certainly would love to hear your feedback as well. And show@thecloudcast.net is the easiest way to get hold of us these days. And we certainly would love to hear from you. And of course, wherever you get your podcasts, if you have the ability, please leave us a review as well. And so for that, I'm going to close it out for this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.